let's get on with it.
The sign-up sheet's in front of the curtain.
Maybe I can just hold this up here and it'll work. Okay, so what I'm going to cover today is what actually is normal for sex at midlife, what physical changes go on in our bodies at midlife that impact on our sex life, what's going on with libido, because everybody talks about libido and why is my libido so bad, and how can we improve our enjoyment of sex from midlife onwards. Now this is an interesting slide here. So this was from a recent media article. It actually refers to Kenya, of all places, but it's a very interesting set of trends to go through. So what we can see here is only 3% of women who have a life with an intimate partner are satisfied with their sex life in Kenya, which is fascinating. 1 in 4 menopausal women had an intimate partner but were not having sex because they blame their partner's poor health. 14% of women said they're not having sex because their partner had a sexual dysfunction, mainly erectile dysfunction, which is often related, so chronic diseases. 1 in 4 women said they weren't having sex after menopause because their partner wasn't interested. 11% said that they were having relationship problems and that's why they weren't having sex after menopause. 1 in 3 didn't have a partner anymore. They'd had a divorce or something like that, and that's the reason they weren't sexually active. 1 in 8 women blamed things like vaginal dryness and painful intercourse. Those were the reasons they weren't having sex. So it's a very interesting little snapshot of just one country. It's obviously not Australia, but we can sort of get a sense of some of the trends that might be applicable to Australia. So interestingly, after menopause, about 75% of women will report problems with vaginal lubrication. So it's pretty common. 28% report having pain with intercourse, 15% get vaginal itching, irritation or pain, and women are very, very much more likely to have issues with their libido as they age compared to men, mainly due to the much lower testosterone levels that women have. Also, 1/3 of couples, as we saw in the previous slide, it's to do with the male partner sexual function. That's the reason why the couple's not having sex. And typically speaking, this trend seems to get worse as we get older. Does anyone have a clapper? I know they were all the rage in the 80s and 90s. But okay. All right, so this is
lights off.
lights on, lights off. Hey Siri, turn the lights off. Right, these are some closer to home statistics, but they are a little bit old, but again, gives you a little bit of an idea of the trends. So what we noticed here was that women most commonly of the sexual problems will report a lack of interest in sex, and that gets worse with age. So up to 65% of women are saying they're not interested in sex by the time they're over 50. The next most common thing was women worrying about how they looked in bed, but this was amongst the younger group of women. So the younger they were, the more likely they were to worry about, how their bodies looked in bed. Thank God for that. Yeah. Yes, that's right. Inability to orgasm was a big one as well. Let me just go back. Aha, there we go. Okay, so yeah, so inability to orgasm was quite a big problem, and up to 50% of women over the age of 50 aren't able to orgasm anymore. What else have we got? We've got vaginal dryness as a biggie, which was about 34%, up to 46% in the older women, so that's another one as well. Organism too quickly. I got organism one day. Yeah, so nice problem to have. Coming too quickly was another problem. So as you can see, there was a range of problems there that was reported. Again, the data's a little bit old, but pretty relevant to our community, I would think. Okay, so there's a bunch of factors that can impact on our enjoyment of sex from menopause onwards or from midlife. A lot of them are physical factors to do with hormones. So for example, you'd be aware that from the age of 51, which is the average age of menopause, you know, what starts to happen is that you'll start to run out of eggs, or if you're like me, it happens a whole lot earlier. So the range of normal is quite large, but the average age is 51. As you start to ovulate less often, you're having less estrogen in your body, and that lack of estrogen is affecting a whole bunch of different organ systems. So your bones, your cardiovascular system, you can get hot flushes, all those sorts of things. And very much affects the urogenital tract and the vaginal tissues as well. So estrogen is really important for keeping the tone of the vaginal tissues so that they can stay well lubricated, moist, you know, the tissues are nice and robust and resilient. So what happens when you get the lack of estrogen is that there's a reduction in the vaginal blood flow. The tissues are getting thinner and more fragile. That's called vulvovaginal atrophy, which is a horrible term, but that's what's happening there. They're drier, you start to get more pain and potentially damage during intercourse and other sexual activity, and because the vagina is less acidic, it's more prone to infection as well. So there's a few different things happening there. Then also, as I mentioned earlier, there's testosterone, because guys naturally have much higher levels of testosterone, and therefore are generally speaking able to, you know, be ready to have sex much quicker than women. Women have much lower levels to start with, but those levels decline with age too. So you've got half the level of testosterone at 40 as what you did when you were 20. So that affects your sex drive, your urges to have sex, and your responsiveness during intercourse. Also then you've got this other stuff going on too. The other menopausal symptoms could be affecting you. You're exhausted from lack of sleep, from having hot flushes during the night. You've got moodiness, or, you know, muscle aches and pains, itchiness, whatever else is going on. And of course, you know, as mentioned earlier, there's partner factors too. So, you know, there might be physical factors with your partner that's making things impossible to have. Your partner's sex drive is low, or if you've got a male partner, they have difficulty having erections and maintaining erections. So yeah, lots of stuff going on there. So the psychosocial stuff is really important. So for women, you know, sex drive is very much tied into psychological and social factors. So even somebody who's actually physiologically normal can actually have a low sex drive. And this becomes more prevalent at menopause too. And there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of stuff is going on at menopause that makes that more common. I've got written down here, scientific studies have demonstrated that having positive feelings for your partner and good psychological health are actually much more important predictors of having a good libido at midlife than hormones. So the psychosocial stuff is actually way more important than your hormone levels when it comes to your libido. Other stuff that I've discovered, there was a study done of 438 Australian women, and that found that the most important factors influencing a woman's libido at midlife were her prior level of sexual functioning. So if previously you've actually had a good libido and good level of sexual functioning, it's likely that it will be higher after midlife. Any change in your partner status. So if you get a new partner, that obviously, you know, positively impacts your sex drive, whereas losing a partner will have a negative impact on your sexual functioning. And the last thing was the level of the feelings that you have for your partner. So those were far and away the three most important things in that study that dictated a person's level of libido after midlife. So just to go through a few things here, these are the sorts of things that can make life very complicated and busy around about midlife for us all. Is that the last one of those? So with all of that going on, it's very easy that, you know, sex will take the back seat and be on the back burner for a lot of people. So other factors, you know, medical health is really important. If you've got chronic medical conditions, if you're on certain types of medications, if you're in pain, if you've got depression, you know, if you've got thyroid in particular, if you are still having periods, then a lot of period problems, PMS, heavy periods, painful periods can be a problem. prolapses, endometriosis, infections, lots of gynecological issues can affect your ability and desire to have intercourse. And as I said, medications there. And so all of those things, if they're going to be impacting on your enjoyment and your pleasure of sex, you're not going to be wanting to engage in sex at all. Yeah, poor chicken. Okay, so when we're talking about, particularly, let's start with the medical things and the physical things and what we can do about them, and then we'll go on to the more psychosocial stuff and libido and how we should be approaching that. But to start with, let's talk about the vaginal dryness and pain with intercourse. So as I mentioned, the decline in estrogen means that the tissues of the vagina are thinner, they're more fragile. You're also more prone to urinary tract infections and urinary leakage and urinary frequency and things like that as well. So if the problem that you're having is vaginal dryness, there's a bunch of things that you can do. Number one, there's a range of different vaginal moisturisers and lubricants you can use. So there's two different things there. You may not have actually heard of vaginal moisturisers. That is something that you can use that would be a water-based moisturiser that actually adds moisture to the tissues of the vagina that you can use every day in a non-sexual situation. So regular use of those is really helpful. Then you've got lubricants which you would use specifically for sexual activity. The ones that are probably best for coating the vaginal tissues and protecting them during intercourse are the silicone-based lubricants, because they're not going to be as readily absorbed into the tissues. So that's kind of an important distinction. And if you would like a rundown, I got this really awesome summary from Sexual Health and Family Planning ACT, which lists a bunch of different personal lubricants and what the different types of lubricants and moisturisers are and how they're best used. You know, even food oils, for example. One thing they don't mention here actually is coconut oil, because coconut oil is a really good one too. Yeah, and it's antibacterial and it's very nice. You know, it's got a nice feel to it for people. So, but it's not actually one of the ones they mention. Anyway, but this is one of the resources that I can send out to you if you would like me to. Just like I said, write down your email addresses and I can get that out to you. Another treatment that's very, very helpful is vaginal estrogens. Now, a lot of people confuse vaginal estrogens for HRT. Yes, it is a hormone and you're giving yourself hormonal therapy, but it's not the same as if you're using a hormonal replacement therapy throughout your body, like what we call a systemic HRT. It's specifically targeted to the vagina and the genitourinary system. So it's going to have the effect of plumping up the tissues of the vagina, making everything much more well lubricated, increasing the blood flow to the area, and it can have a really, really very fast result. So I even give it to people for a few weeks before I do pap smears if they know that their pap smears are going to be painful. So you just use it every night for 2 or 3 weeks. It induces a really good positive improvement in the tissues of the vagina, and then you just drop it back to every once or twice a week for maintenance. So even if you're not somebody who's planning on using HRT for other reasons like hot flushes, you can actually get really good benefit from vaginal estrogens. And that may even be an option depending on the situation, even for people who've had breast cancer. You know, it depends on the type of breast cancer you've had, and if vaginal estrogens aren't an option, there's also a bit of experimentation going on with treatments like vaginal testosterone for people who've had breast cancer, which seems to also induce some really good changes in the vaginal tissues. So there's new stuff coming along all the time. There's plenty of things we can do, and so yeah, if pain because of vaginal dryness is an issue with you, definitely I'd recommend go and speak to somebody who's knowledgeable in this area and get help, because you don't want that to get in the way of your sex life.
Are the estrogen creams prescription?
They are, yeah. Estrogen and testosterone ones do need to be prescribed by a doctor, yeah. Okay, so contraception, that's why the pretty array of little frangers up there. So what you have to remember is that around perimenopause, so if you're still having periods and even for a short time after you think you've had your last period, doesn't necessarily mean you can't fall pregnant. It's pretty unlikely, you know, particularly if you're around about 50 or older, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to get pregnant, but it doesn't mean there's no risk there. So the recommendation is that if you have your last period under the age of 50, that you should continue to use contraception for 2 more years, and if it's over the age of 50, then you should continue to use it for 1 year. So keep using contraception until you've actually been 1 whole year without a period. STIs, guess what? Chlamydia doesn't care what age you are. So we've all been very, very good at getting the safe sex message out there to all of our daughters and sons. But unfortunately, there is a lot of repartnering, well, not unfortunately, but there's a lot of repartnering that goes on in midlife these days. And I think that probably our age group are not so much prepared. You know, we maybe go to a conference or meet somebody at a party or something, and we're actually not anticipating or expecting or looking for that, and so we tend to be not really well prepared. And then we're, you know, because we may not have had partner changes recently, we're out of practice with negotiating those conversations, and then before you know it, it's like, oh, you know, you just decided to do it anyway, even though you don't have a condom or something like that. So anyway, STIs still are a big issue. If you have a new partner, it's always, you know, the best policy is to always use condoms, at least until such time as both of you get checked out for STIs and you decide that you're in a monogamous relationship, and that's all negotiated. So just don't forget about that. Yes, when we're talking about the treatment of sexual issues, there's a few key things, and obviously if you've got untreated medical issues, that's going to be a biggie. If you've got untreated depression, or you've got terrible thyroid disorders, or you know or out of control diabetes, or any of those sorts of things, that's going to be severely impacting on, you know, your overall well-being, and certainly on your willingness to want to engage in sexual activities. So it's really important to make sure that you're working with your doctor to treat your medical conditions effectively, and of course any other menopausal symptoms. So again, if you've got dreadful hot flushes, go and talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about, and maybe get those sorted out, and then you might get some rest, and you might actually feel a bit more energetic and more inclined to want intercourse or sex in general. I shouldn't say intercourse, because, you know, it's not all about penetration these days. Okay, so sexual health screening. Just because I'm a GP, I have to, you know, like, I have to get my dig in there about making sure you're getting your screening done.
So true, isn't it, when they go to the lab?
I still say it. I can't help myself. I still say relax, and I can't help it. Okay, so really, really important to continue to get your cervical and breast screening done. You know, people get very, very worried about the risk of breast cancer with HRT. And one of the conversations I always have with people about that is the fact that every woman in this country has a 1 in 8 lifetime risk of getting breast cancer. And then some of them even more than that, depending on family history and, you know, personal individual risk. So it's really important that whatever, regardless of whether or not you're on HRT or other medications, it's really important to make sure you've got that regular screening in place, and that you're doing regular breast self-examination, and you're getting your mammograms and all that stuff. Because regardless of whether you're on HRT, I still can't take away that 1 in 8 risk. So yeah, get your screening done. No longer pap smears, now it's called a cervical screening test, and if you have a negative test for human papillomavirus, which is the thing that causes the changes in the cervical cells, if that comes up negative, you don't need another test for 5 years. So 5 yearly tests now. And of course the STI checks, as I mentioned. If you're changing partners regularly, it's a great idea to get an STI check each time you have a new partner. So yeah, I would recommend that to everyone. Now, where did my libido go? Now we're going to talk about libido specifically, rather than, you know, so much the medical side of things. And there was some really nice, what was I going to read out of this one? This is actually a book called Where Did My Libido Go?, which is by Dr. Rosie King. And I've got a really nice section in here that I wanted to read out to you that she wrote. Okay, so when it comes to libido, a lot of women are really worried, you know, they're very anxious about their level of sexual functioning. They're anxious about why is my desire so low, and the more they worry about it, the lower their desire gets. And so this is a very good little section that she's written here. She says, the reality of female sexual desire. What can women realistically expect from sexual desire? Most women will experience sexual desire during the early stages of relationships, and then once the relationship becomes established and the limerence phase has passed, that's like the honeymoon phase, many women are disappointed to find that they no longer feel sustained spontaneous desire for sex. In particular, they no longer feel levels of lust high enough to motivate them to initiate sex with their partners. This is such a common scenario that it must be considered normal. Desire may be fleeting and intermittent, or it may disappear completely. For some women, desire fades for obvious reasons, such as fatigue, depression, or relationship unhappiness. For others, there's no obvious explanation for their reduced desire. But lack of lust doesn't necessarily mean that a woman doesn't want sex. In fact, while a woman may rarely or never feel spontaneously horny, she might be quite receptive to her partner's sexual overtures. Yet, women like this are often unhappy and disappointed with their libidos because they crave the high levels of passion in their lives that they used to enjoy. So I guess one of the big points she makes in the book is the fact that a lot of this angst and a lot of people coming in and saying, my libido is tanked, what's wrong with me, you know, I don't feel like, I don't never want to have sex, I just want to read a good book and go to sleep. You know, they get anxious about that because they can remember a time when it wasn't like that. And I think what's really important in this conversation is to realise that it's actually really normal, that you wouldn't have a high level of desire all the time, or if ever. And in fact, what she talks about is the fact that for women, desire often actually follows on from intimacy. So, you know, you feel close to your partner, and you go, okay, yeah, sure, let's have a cuddle, and then you start to get into a bit, and then you start to feel desire. So it's not like you feel desire and then you have sex. It's actually you feel desire as a result of, you know, sex being initiated. So it's all a little bit turned around from where it was when we were younger. So I guess in trying to assess whether your libido issue is a problem, I like to split it up into two categories. One category are the people who they actually don't feel much like ever initiating sex. They couldn't ever say, oh yeah, I feel horny. But if they actually start to engage in a little bit of kissing, cuddling and making out with their partner, they do start to get into it. And then when they do start to have sex, they enjoy it and they may orgasm, and they really, you know, they find it quite pleasurable. Then there's a second category, which basically they just don't enjoy it at all. Even if they make the effort, they might just go, okay, I'll just grin and bear it because I know it's going to be horrible. You know, they're the people that's a completely different kettle of fish with a completely different sort of approach to it. So I guess one important distinction to make if you're having libido issues is, you know, do you recognise yourself in one of those categories? That is the book, and you can get it on Kindle, as you saw. I highly recommend it. She really sort of puts together all the different categories of libido issues very nicely, even in the first couple of chapters, even if you're only going to have a short read. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you this one, but this is another little video, which is it's a Mayo clinician, a doctor from the Mayo Clinic, who's talking about the reasons why libido declines at midlife, and you know the different ways we've got to start thinking about libido at midlife, and that will be in the links later if you want me to send them out. So these are important points to make about the psychosocial aspects of libido. You know, I guess if you don't feel much like sex ever, and neither does your partner, well then there's really no problem, is there? Because you've got pretty much a matched level of desire or lack of desire. The problem comes in is if one partner's feeling pressured all the time to have sex and doesn't want to, and the other partner's feeling rejected all the time because they want sex and they're not getting it. So that's when it becomes a couple problem, and it's really important to avoid blame in that situation, and to be able to sort of negotiate what everyone's expectations are. And it's such a charged subject, you know, it can be really, really difficult if you're not used to having those conversations and you've built up patterns, you know, of interacting over years and years and years. So sometimes it pays to get a third person involved, just to go along to a counsellor and have somebody that you can bounce ideas off, or who can actually even interpret or mediate what's being said between people. Another important thing that came out of Rosie King's book, she also talks about the importance of not blaming and shaming our partners who have higher sex drives than we do, not making them feel like dirty and shamed, or like it's, you know, for wanting it all the time, that's wrong in some way, you know, because to them it's an expression of their love for you and that they want to be intimate with you, and they do value, you know, closeness with you. So just by going, oh, for God's sake, you want it all the time, just give me a break, you know, like making him feel like he's a bad person for wanting sex, that's not really helpful either. So, you know, there's some really good discussions in there. I think it's worth having a look at. So these next few slides, I've taken these directly from a fact sheet from Jean Hales, and I'll show you the website for that in a little bit. It's a fact sheet about libido, and so these next few slides is just a nice little table they've put together about different ways you can manage libido. Some of it's stuff we've already talked about, you know, like looking after your general health. It's really important with libido and sex and all of that is to make sure that there's opportunities in people's lives for it to happen. I mean, basically, you know, if you're never in the same house at the same time, feeling relaxed, not too tired, not too stressed, have some privacy. If you're not actually having those situations where you have those opportunities to start interacting in an intimate way, even if it's just to have a chat, you know, it's hard to build intimacy, and then it's hard to actually sort of take the next step and want to have sex and closeness and cuddles. So creating opportunity, sometimes it actually gets to the point where it just has to be programmed in. If you really value intimacy in your relationship, you actually have to do what's called decision-based sex, which is actually building it into your program, building it into your day and making time for it. And then, communication. This is hard. This stuff is hard, especially if you've got established patterns of communication that are based on years and years and years, maybe of benign neglect, where you're not actually talking to each other a whole lot about this stuff. But, you know, so it might actually be a real surprise to your partner if you start suddenly going, you know, do it like this, I like it like that, I love it when you do that, you know. But, you know, if you start to talk about it together, if you go, hey, you know, I've had these thoughts about how we could improve the quality of our relationship, but we're going to have to sit down and start having some awkward conversations, and it won't be easy to begin with, but if you stick with it and keep working together, then the communication will start to get easier. And of course, the benefit to your partner, especially if they're a partner who wants sex more than you do, is that the more you communicate, the more you start to enjoy sex, the more willing you will be to participate and engage.
Do you find though that men tend not to want to talk about this?
Men tend not to talk about a lot of things, really.
I mean, you bring it up, they're actually more self-conscious about it.
Yeah.
I'm doing the act and into it. But
Yeah. Do you find that too?
Yeah, like, I mean, I'm happy to talk about it, but I've found,
Yeah.
you know, that they go, oh.
Yeah.
Well, they're appalling communicators to start with.
Well,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, but it's interesting, I think, if you were.
Yeah, and that's why it can feel very difficult at first to have those conversations. But, you know, if you always do what you've always done, then you always get what you've always got, right? So at some point you've got to go, you know, something's not right here, or, you know, and we've both got a lot to gain by trying to change the situation. So maybe even if we're a bit uncomfortable, maybe it's worthwhile starting that conversation. So yeah, tricky, very tricky. So this is, you know, just a little bit more on that about the decision-driven sex. about actually, to a certain point, for people who know that they're going to probably enjoy sex once they get started, then it's just, Rosie King calls it the hump of reluctance. You've got to get over the hump of reluctance. You know, so you've got to actually, to a certain extent, you've got to rationalise and make a choice to actually try to get into it, you know, and then actually your desire grows when you start to get into it and you go, actually this is kind of nice, I think I'm in now, and why don't I do this more often? You know, you enjoy it in the end and you sort of think maybe I should do that more often. So if that's your situation, then maybe, you know, rationalising with yourself about all the benefits to your health and your relationship and everything else from actually making that effort to get over the hump of reluctance and then start to climb the hill of ecstasy, you know, that might be worthwhile. Right. So yeah, and then this is, I guess what we were talking about with the communication falls under the explore part to a certain extent, exploring new ways of doing things, you know, even if it comes down to the communication. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff here. Now, exploration of sexuality is an awkward subject for a lot of people. I talk to loads of women who really have never gotten to know their own genitalia. They don't know much about their genital anatomy. They were taught that it's shameful to touch yourself, that women aren't supposed to enjoy having sex. You know, there has been a great sexual revolution which has actually changed things a lot, and it's acknowledged the fact that, you know, women can enjoy sex a lot as well and deserve to. But to a certain extent also that's had the knock-on effect of, in certain quarters, women feeling like that they should be horny all the time, and then that puts extra pressure on us and anxiety as to why we don't. So, you know, I think it pays to really start thinking about what you want at some point. So, I mean, you ladies have all come along to have a chat about this subject, which makes me think, okay, you're interested in the subject at least. You know, if your interest is in having a better quality sex life, then maybe the way forward to that is to actually understand yourself and what it is that you enjoy, because in knowing that, then you can communicate that to your partner. So, you know, one of the other things about our physiology from midlife on is not only the vaginal dryness and lubrication, but it's actually way harder to orgasm. And, you know, the expectation always is that there needs to be an orgasm at the end of it, you know, for it to be any good. Well, is that the case? And does there need to be penetrative sex for it to be any good? You know, they talk about now about outer course, and how outer course can be very, very pleasurable, and in some cases more pleasurable for women after midlife, because you don't have the worry and the fear and the pain associated with the intercourse. So, you know, one of the things that can make things a lot easier for women who are struggling to enjoy intercourse or outer course or come to orgasm is, for example, sex toys like vibrators and things like that. And that's again something that I think during our upbringing it would have been thought of as being something kind of dirty, shameful, like a bit of a joke, yeah, sex toy party and all of that kind of thing. But in actual fact, it makes things just a whole lot easier. And a lot of people say that they think their partner would be threatened by the idea of them using a sex toy, that they'd go, well, hang on, aren't I good enough? But in actual fact, I think if you can turn it around and make them realise that by you actually getting pleasure much more quickly, it makes their life so much easier as well, and that makes you, knowing that you're going to enjoy things a lot better and a lot more easily, that you'll be more willing to engage in sexual activities as well. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why, if you've never thought about these things before, that it might actually be worthwhile doing it. Just to think about that, I'm going to include, which I'll show you in a minute, there's a bunch of different websites, there's a bunch of different videos you can look at, you know, just to give you some ideas about, you know, what's sort of different sexual practices and sex toys and sexuality for older people, and it's not dirty or shameful. I mean, you know, it's just a healthy way of enjoying sex and actually making your life a whole lot easier, because you don't have to sit there, you know, for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and still find that you can't come at the end of it all. So yeah, there's a lot of things there that, a lot of options these days for everyone. So now just talking a little bit about the different sources of information for you. Jean Hales, you know about Jean Hales Women's Health Week, that's kind of why we're here. They have a brilliant website, and they are actually founded by the first doctor in Australia to actually start a menopause clinic. Her name was Jean Hales. So that their bread and butter and their origins were in menopause. So they've grown since that time. They cover off on a whole bunch of different women's health areas: polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, you know, a range of different things. And they've got some fantastic information sheets. This one here that I've pulled up is on dyspareunia or painful sex. The one that I showed you, which had the tables of all the suggestions of how to manage libido issues, was this one here. So all there on the Jean Hales website. And another really good source of reliable information is the Australasian Menopause Society. I use their information sheets a lot. So for all manner of different menopause issues, if you're interested in knowing the treatments and the evidence for safety and the different options available, they've got a humongous list of different information sheets that are very readable, very, very reliable and evidence-based, and they're done by an Australian organisation. This is one that I've found as well, because I think, you know, we're all very good at getting together and having a chat about this stuff and being open to new information. But as pointed out earlier, guys can be a little bit like, oh, you know, like either not willing to engage or a bit embarrassed about engaging or not quite sure how to engage. But you know, there's resources out there that can help you open that conversation as well. So even if you're not the kind of couple that wants to go to a relationship counsellor or something like that, or a marital counsellor, you know, there'll be other sources of useful information out there at hand as well. So the video resources, if you're interested in me sending you out the links that I found, I've got a whole bunch of stuff here, you know, some introductory stuff about sexuality for seniors, sex toys, some funny things, some informative things, so they're all there. And also, because I was hoping that Liz Kilby would be along to help me out today, but she couldn't make it, so I've also included, these are Jean Hales videos that have a good bunch of stuff about like how to work out if you're doing your pelvic floor exercises correctly, and how a pelvic floor physio would assess you and approach the issue of pelvic pain if pain with intercourse was your issue. Mm-hmm. This is actually one of the videos that I just popped up there, the link to, was by Joe Devine, and they actually have a bunch of really nice information and stuff that's specifically about, you know, sex aids for older adults. Have any of you seen that Grace and Frankie? Or yeah, where they designed their own range of vibrators for the older woman, which would, you know, they had glow in the dark buttons because, you know, when older people have trouble seeing the buttons, and they were arthritis friendly designs, and you know, all that. It was all specifically designed for the older person. But you know, there are people thinking about this stuff. They're thinking about us. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say in a formal sense, but as well as that, I just wanted to, if I may, just mention to you about the business that I've launched, which is WellFemme. So basically what I'm doing is I'm doing telehealth menopause consultations. I'm trying to make it available to women in rural and remote areas who don't have the benefit of being able to go and see a specialist GP or gynecologist or endocrinologist in person. So yeah, that's the work that I'm doing at the moment. As I said, I've got a piece of paper over there, and if you're interested in joining the mailing list to get the resources from today's talk, please write your name down over there, and I've got some brochures and cards over there. I do menopause consultations here in Canberra, and so details of my website and everything for all that is on the cards. Yeah. So that's it for the formal part of the talk. I really only just touched on a whole bunch of stuff there, but I'm more than happy to talk for as long as you want me to with any questions that you have.